Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Actually, now that we are 26 people, I think we can start. Um, all right, so welcome everyone to this new webinar about our second challenge with UNDP. We're very excited with sharing with you some more information about the requirements, what we're looking for in terms of the solutions that you will be submitting. We will be talking about, as I said, our latest challenge with UNDP called Build the Future of Crisis Mapping. The webinar agenda includes a brief introduction to Anila and Arnold, who are joining me today, and then we will go through some descriptions and some specifications about what we're looking for, the UNDP itself, the challenge that we are launching, and also we will dive into your submission requirements. And after that, we will go to the Q&A sessions. So over the past few days, we shared with our community a survey to collect some of the questions that you might already have. And we will start with addressing those. After that, we will take any additional questions that might be raised in the chat. So please feel free to use the chat to enter the questions that you have. Or you can also send them by email to community@innocentive.com. Please note that if we run out of time and we don't have enough time to address them all, we will do it offline, but we will definitely go back to you with some answers. So to kick off the session today with Anila Shehaya and Arnold Njogu from the UNDP team. So welcome, guys. And if you could tell us a little bit, do a brief introduction of yourself, and then start telling us a little bit more about the UNDP and the challenge, that would be great.
Thanks so much, Juan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name's Anila. I lead the Assessments and Digital Solutions team at the United Nations Development Program. Our work supports country offices and governments in generating data on impacts of crises on communities, their livelihoods, infrastructure, to guide crisis response and recovery. So these efforts have informed emergency planning, reconstruction, livelihood restoration in over 60 countries worldwide since 2020. Over to you, Arnold. Thanks.
Thanks, Anila, and greetings, everyone. My name is Arnold Njogu. I've been working with information management within UNDP's Crisis Bureau for the last about 6 years, supporting assessments from household assessments to assessments of enterprises and public infrastructure, and more recently, integrating sort of satellite imagery assessments and remote assessments. And very excited to be engaging with you today to see how we can better incorporate local voices and be able to link that with global decision making to attain sustainable recovery. So thanks, and back to you, Anil.
Thank you, Arnold. So if we go on to the next slide, just to set the stage on UNDP itself and the work and the mandate, right? UNDP works in over 170 countries and territories to advance sustainable development and reduce poverty and inequality. And within this mandate, the Crisis Bureau leads UNDP's work on crisis prevention, response, recovery, where it shapes policy, programs, partnerships, while at the same time providing search capacity and technical expertise to support country offices in different crisis contexts around the world. Within the Crisis Bureau, the Assessments and Digital Solutions team supports country offices in understanding, as I said previously, the impact of crises on people, on livelihoods, on infrastructure, etc. So this challenge sits directly within that work, right? It's designed to complement the digital tools and methodologies that we already use and to help us move faster and more effectively in the immediate aftermath of a crisis. So we're particularly interested in solutions that can be operationalized in real life contexts, and we're really excited to see what the community will bring forward. And with that, I'll hand it over to Arnold, who will walk you through the problem statement and what we're looking for through this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Anila. So I'll start with some very high numbers where, according to UN OCHA, every 72 hours we have a crisis that happens somewhere in the world that displaces thousands of people. And at this very moment in time during this webinar, we have about 300 million people who are estimated to be living in the aftermath of some sort of disaster. So just imagine if we could have the right data point at the right time that could make the difference between starting recovery in a matter of days or prolonging the suffering of these vulnerable and affected communities to weeks and even months after the crisis. How could we go about it? In the 4 following slides, I'm just going to be talking about just that, where we'll be looking at what is the problem with slow data and how that delays recovery. We'll be looking at how we can then improve the future of crisis mapping to tackle this solution, how this is going to have an impact on real communities, and what you can do or how you can do what you can do to help to shape this future. So if you go back to just the previous slide, as many of you might already be familiar, dealing with data that is either incomplete or not credible enough to be used for decision making can be quite problematic. And in UNDP's work of responding to crisis, credible data points can literally translate into life-saving decisions. And the challenge of availing credible data in a timely fashion is quite paramount. And whenever we are talking about data in the aftermath of crisis, you can think about the number of buildings damaged, the number of roads destroyed, the number of bridges that have collapsed. But it is not just this physical infrastructure that we look at. Behind all of these facilities, we have real people and we have real communities that depend on them. So for example, when we talk about the number of buildings that have been damaged, we are looking at real families that have been left without shelter. When we are talking about hospitals that have been destroyed, we are looking at sick and injured people in the aftermath of crisis who do not have access to life-saving medical aid. When we talk about schools that have been demolished or destroyed, again, we are talking about children who no longer have access to education. So being able to have this rapid data and evidence on where we're having the damage and the impact itself will directly allow us to begin recovery rapidly and be able to support these communities. And of course, we have a number of methodologies that allow us to go to the ground and collect this evidence. And traditionally, some of these methods were quite slow because they would involve, training enumerators, going to the field, collect data over a number of days, analyze that data, and then by the time you're transforming that data into actionable insight, the window to act is already over. And in recent years, UNDP has acknowledged this, and we have significantly improved our intelligence gathering methodologies such that we can be able to respond in days from weeks previously. And one way that we are doing this is by using the RAPIDA methodology. And what the RAPIDA methodology allows us to do is that it combines satellite imagery with field data from the ground to create a clear picture of the crisis impact within just a few days or even hours. And these insights guide immediate response and inform longer-term recovery planning that we lead together with governments and our national partners. And just some examples of how this has proven invaluable: we had Hurricane Melissa last year in Jamaica, where insights from RAPIDA within days directly informed debris clearing and rubble clearing programs that enabled access routes to critical infrastructure and to markets. Earlier this year, we had successive cyclones and floods in Madagascar, and this methodology proved quite invaluable in terms of advocating for, in terms of advocacy, and also in terms of planning for resource mobilization. But this alone, we acknowledge, is not enough, and we want to go to the next step of this crisis mapping by accelerating this initial situational awareness with the realities on the ground. And this brings us to the next slide of the challenge, which is crowdsourcing impact data. And what essentially we are looking for here is we are looking for an innovative and digital tool that is going to allow communities to capture and to submit real-time data, typically within the first 48 hours of the crisis. And the data that we are looking for would be geotagged crisis data. So we are looking at photos of damaged infrastructure, and these photos should come with the geolocation of where exactly it lies, what is metadata, like what is the extent of damage to this specific infrastructure, and supplementary information on services. For example, what is the extent of damage to health facilities in the area, or what is the extent of disruption to energy services in the neighborhood. And we believe that these sort of early insights are going to improve crisis response and early recovery decision making. Now, when we are talking about communities submitting this data, we are talking about ordinary folk who have access to smartphones. These are not technical people who are trained in assessment methodologies. So how you design this platform should be quite user-friendly, should be quite intuitive, in that anybody can be able to easily uptake, capture information and submit information to the cloud. And we have to acknowledge that crises usually disrupt infrastructure. So in crisis context, you might have telecommunication infrastructure, for example, being destroyed. Thus, having a solution that can function in these harsh environments is quite critical. One functionality that we'll be looking at is offline functionality, in that users should be able to fully use the application or the tool offline. That is in terms of capturing information and prompting the upload. In cases where there's no internet connectivity, we expect that the data would be queued and then uploaded asynchronously as soon as our network is gathered from the device. And here we are talking about low bandwidth environments, so the tool should be quite low bandwidth, whether it's 2G, 3G internet connection, it should be able to work under those very constrained scenarios. Additionally, when we are talking about inclusivity of the tool, as Anila mentioned, we work in 170 countries and territories globally. So multilingual support is quite a key factor that we'll be looking at. At the bare minimum, we expect your solution to prove that it can be able to work with the 6 core UN languages, which are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. And additionally, we'll expect you to prove how your solution can be able to integrate additional local languages. And nowadays, we have a lot of open source tools that allow for translation. You can go for the option of manually inputting local translation into your tool. So here, creativity is quite open, but we do expect you to be able to demonstrate how that works. Then of paramount importance would be the data security and the data privacy. One thing that is core to UNDP in all its digital initiatives is data governance. So we'll be looking at the safeguards that you have in place in your solution to be able to protect the privacy of the people who will be responding to the data, along with the integrity of the backend system, to be able to host the secure database that can be scaled for widespread data collection. And the context where this will be working is whether it's a earthquake, whether it's a cyclone, whether it's floods, whether it's wildfires, your tool should be able to be adaptable to all these various contexts. And how we expect you to package this is through a written submission with a working prototype that can be tested. So even if your prototype is based on low code or low code scenarios, you should be able to demonstrate that it can work with the offline functionality. For example, that the asynchronous data upload can work, that you can be able to export data for use by other platforms and other users. And a good way to do this would be accompanying your solution with a short video tutorial demonstrating how this solution would work. Now, a very important note to have here is on using AI and vibe coding for your solutions. We truly encourage and request you to be intentional with how you're submitting these solutions, because while AI is a powerful tool and that we acknowledge, we are looking for engineering that is intentional and not just AI-generated prompts that have been put together and submitted. And some of the ways we'll be able to tell this is through user design, which is quite critical. whatever platform you're providing is not just something that you submit information with. It is a tool for the community to be encouraged, to be motivated, to be able to submit data, and for us to be able to get that. So the way that the UI or the user interface is designed is going to be a key evaluation metric. Also, the clarity in your architecture. It's not just lines of code that we'll be looking, but you must be clearly be able to demonstrate the end-to-end data workflow. We need to see how the data is moving. We need to see how the data is staying secure. We need to see how your logic can be able to scale for widespread data collection. And finally is the human element. So even if AI assists you to come up with your solution, you must still be the architect behind it. And your submission must be able to prove that you have a very deep understanding of the structure of the system that you're proposing. Now, what do we aim to achieve with all of this? If we go to the next slide. This rapid ground evidence directly translates to real-world impact because we get a better idea on how we can plan to rebuild home for families so that people can go back to their shelters. We get ideas of where there's need for restoring critical health infrastructure so that the medical services can resume. And it allows us to do things like reopening schools and education facilities so that those kind of systems can go on. So this is quite real life and tangible impact that this solution is going to allow us to achieve. On a technical level, this additional layer of information and of ground information that the system is going to generate will help UNDP and our partners to verify insights from other sources, including remote sources like satellite image analysis, like key informants from the ground. And this is going to really improve the confidence of the insights that we generate and the subsequent decision-making that we use for response and recovery and recovery. Then finally is on the empowerment, because we believe that sustainable recovery is not something that you just deliver to a community. It is something that you build with them. So creating this direct link between the affected populations and the decision makers, we can be able to ensure that the path to recovery is paved with local ownership and has a more long-lasting impact. So finally, how can you help us to be part of the solution? If we go to the next slide. First of all, we want a working app that is going to enable crowdsourcing of photos and descriptions of damage in a crisis, where UNDP and evaluators are going to test the minimal viable product version of your solution in order to gauge its effectiveness. As we mentioned before, we are going to look at how well-designed your user-facing front-end is, with the ability for community members to be able to enter information through either one or multiple channels. So whether it's just through a standalone application or whether you're going to integrate channels like WhatsApp, like Telegram, etc., you have the creative direction to go about it, and we'll be looking at that. Additionally, we are looking at multilingual support, as we mentioned before. As you might have seen in the challenge, support for additional local languages, in addition to the 6 core UN languages, is a mandatory requirement, and this is particularly important for crisis context. So it should be capable of handling and translating local content through auto-translation, through manual configuration of user language, or through the use of open source tools. Again, you're free to have the creative direction in that regard. Then real-time geolocated mapping of reports is important. We are looking for a solution that can work in low or no connectivity settings in the aftermath of crisis. And we already mentioned before how the offline functionality we envision it working, in that you can have an app, you can be able to collect data, you can be able to submit data offline, and then there's asynchronous maybe upload now or upload data functionality within it, or automatic upload once the device is exposed to some sort of network connectivity. In terms of where we do not have any building footprints or where there's a problem with GPS locations, we'd say that it's not about the accuracy of the location, but how well field teams that are going to be using this data can locate the actual location that respondents have put in. You're free to be able to integrate base maps like OpenStreetMaps into your solution so that it is easier for respondents to pick a building. But if that's not the case, they can use approximate GPS locations where we'll encourage you to also collect metadata like the accuracy of the location, whether it's 5 meters, 10 meters is at least at the bare minimum preferable, or they can also be able to drop a pin manually within the user interface. And again, this is up to your discretion, but the focus should be on usability and scalability and not just on the precision. Then, as mentioned before, we want low bandwidth, we want something scalable, we want something secure, and something that is privacy compliant. And here we'll be looking at things like data minimization. As much as possible, not collecting personally identifiable information like the names of people, the dates of birth, especially in conflict settings where this kind of data can be quite sensitive. We are also going to be looking at in-app compression of image sizes so that it can be able to, within the app, compress large media and work in low connectivity environments in terms of uploading these kind of things. How it is going to be handling large volumes of data simultaneously across different contexts is also something that we are going to be looking at. And of course, it has to be compliant with global data and security standards and also in line with the UNDP data governance frameworks. And I think we can be able to share some resources with you after this webinar on how UNDP looks at data privacy, data ethics, and all that. Then in terms of a dashboard or map interface that shows geolocation and damage classification, this can be two-way. One can be front end for the people who are submitting the data to sort of incentivize them to submit more data. And when you're doing this, you should be very cognizant of the data privacy again. So not showing individual GPS locations of hospitals or of critical infrastructure that can put these kinds of institutions at risk. But rather, aggregated heat maps, aggregated summary statistics for the front end or for the community users. And on the back end, we should be able to see this raw data in maps, in dashboards, in a way that we can also be able to analyze on our own and come up with our own sort of analysis. I've already talked about the non-monetary incentives, things like aggregated impact dashboards that community members feel they have been a part of contributing to. Something else you can explore would be having information as a service, where if a respondent reports damage for a specific location, you can give them a service of information by telling them, avoid this certain area because there's a bridge destroyed or these kind of things. But again, we'll be looking to tap into your creativity there to be able to come up with solutions on how this can be advanced. And of course, if you've gone through the challenge guidelines, we have optional features that you can incorporate into your solutions. And some of these would be advanced AI analysis, for example, automatic damage classification before a respondent even classifies the damage. But where you incorporate AI, remember to have a clear documentation of the assumptions that are going behind these AI models. For example, if it is an AI model on damage classification, you should be able to clearly show how you arrive at a completely damaged or partially damaged sort of classification scheme, whether it's by looking at the roof being completely destroyed or the wall having collapsed. That needs to be clearly written. And even if you incorporate AI analysis, we are very strong on the human element and the human verification element. So the human should be the final sort of decision maker on that. So your solutions, if they incorporate AI, should have this sort of confidence intervals. Like, it's not saying that the building is completely damaged, but rather there's 95% or 90% certainty that this building or this number of buildings are completely damaged. Other optional features include ideas on rapid deployment. If you have ideas on how, again, within the first 48 hours is the critical timeline that we are looking at, how we can be able to advertise, how we can be able to open source, and how we can be able to support the usage of these tools and this system in affected regions, that's going to be a bonus. Also features like how you can be able to do some accuracy checks, like redundancy detection to spot where multiple submissions have been reported for the same place, or there's over-reporting for a certain infrastructure, and how we can be able to avoid that in a solution. This is again is going to be a bonus. And finally, the ability to describe locations using familiar landmarks. Again, we said we are not looking specifically for precision, but it's more about the usability and how field teams can be able to use the data that you generate to triangulate with other complementary data sources and other remote analysis and all that. So at this juncture, I'll hand it over back to Yuan to talk about the submission requirements, but looking forward to engage with you during the Q&A in case you have any questions on what has been presented so far. So over to you, Yuan.
And thank you, Arnold. And thanks for both presentations, Anila and Arnold. So now around the submission, so this is very similar to what we have used in different challenges. So you might be a little bit familiar with this structure. So first of all, while you're submitting your proposal on the platform, we will be asking you for your participation type, whether you're submitting it on behalf of yourself, just as a solver, an individual solver, or as an organization. Please also let us know what's the technology readiness level for your solution. Just remember that we are looking for solutions starting from TRL4, so proof of concepts, making sure that we're looking at prototypes rather than just theoretical and brainstorm ideas. Then let us know if you would be able for partnering, just in case this opportunity comes up at a later stage of the project. Let us know if you would be up for a partnership with UNDP and the team that would be developing the solution. In terms of the problem and opportunity, please let us know what's your unique approach of the problem, what makes it different, and what are the advantages and benefits that this particular point of view brings. Then in the solution overview, please make sure that you're covering the main solution requirements, letting us know how this prototype is addressing all the requirements that Arnold just mentioned, making sure to highlight not only how it is well designed from an UI perspective, but also the data sets, the codes, the data export, and all the different things that we are asking you to work on. So make sure that you are explaining them in the solution overview form field. Next one, Santi, please. Then we have the solution risks. So please let us know what are some of the risks that you might have identified already in the solution, and what are some ways of overcoming those potential risks. In terms of online references, please provide any links, articles, publications that would be relevant for your submission. And I want to be clear on these online references. Please make sure that you're adding links that we can access, existing links. Please double, triple check the links that you're sharing. And we definitely are more interested in quality references and quality links rather than quantity. So please make sure that they're accessible and that they're relevant to the solution that you're proposing. Then we have the solution feasibility. Tell us a little bit about some precedents, references, so our evaluators can take a look and decide on the feasibility of the solution. Please add all the information that you can have. In terms of the experience, tell us a little bit about your background, if you've worked on these type of projects before, what are the skills that you have for solving this particular challenge. And then we have the attachment section, which is pretty key for this particular challenge, because we are looking for two different types of links. The first one is a link to a web version or access to your prototype. And in terms of the prototype, one key suggestion, we have been going through different ideas that have already been submitted. And we found out that sometimes they're not review ready, the prototypes, or they're just images or wireframes. But what we're looking for is to have review ready prototypes So please make sure that you're providing a clear URL. If we need credentials to log in, please add them in the in any of the form fields during the submission. And also make sure to structure your prototype so it's easier for the evaluators to complete the core workflow that we're requesting on the challenge. So once again, it's all around capture and display, the storage and the data, and then the export of it. And also show us on your prototype how your solution stores and classifies the damage reports. So this is pretty key for us in terms of the prototype. Then we have the link to your pitch video, which shouldn't be longer than 2 minutes. And this is key because we are asking you to walk us through your prototype, showing how it captures and displays the damage, how the storage is done, and then how it's going to be exported. So make sure that on this video, you are showing and walking us through this workflow that we have mentioned several times. It could be a screen recording of the tool being used. And also make sure that if you're speaking in another language, use subtitles in English, just to make it easier for evaluators to go through your submissions. So those are the main things that I wanted also to highlight and recommend key recommendations for your submission. Also would want to highlight what Arnold said before regarding low bandwidth and intermittent connectivity due to the crisis and some infrastructure that might be compromised due to the situation, and also think about how it would work in, for example, older mobile devices, low power situations, and so on. So also all the nice to have, such as the non-monetary incentives, and how can we make sure that communities are using this tool, and in that case would bring value to the community itself, but also to the other organizations that are working around crisis recovery. So those are the main things that I wanted to cover today in terms of your submission, and I think that we are ready to go to our Q&A session. I know this is sometimes the most interesting part for our solvers, and we've got lots of questions, which we're grateful for. So we are going to start with them. Before diving into that, please don't forget that submissions deadline will be June 23rd. So please make sure that you're uploading all the right information, the links, and everything's ready to be evaluated by the 23rd of June of 2026. All right, so let's focus on Q&A. So Santi, I will ask you to start highlighting some of the questions that we've had, and Anila and Arnold will help us answering these questions. So the first question we've got is, for real-time crisis mapping in low connectivity environments, post-disaster conflict zones, what are the preferred data collection methodologies? Specifically, does the challenge prioritize satellite imagery, ground-based mobile sensors, UAV, drone deployment, or hybrid AI-driven approaches that can function offline and sync with when connectivity returns? Arnold or Anila?
Yes. So for this one, UNDP is already a leader in satellite sort of imagery analysis and drone technology. And it's important to note that this particular challenge is specifically about the ground truth data. The ground photos, the ground damage categorizations, to be able to complement the data that we are getting from the satellite imagery analysis. And what we are looking from this sort of methodology is to be able to produce data in standardized formats. I saw a question in the chat on the formats. So our data in standardized formats like GeoJSON, like CSVs, KML, shapefiles that can be easily layered on top with our existing satellite maps and our drone mosaics and our remote analysis. Yes, I think that's what we are looking for.
So it's
But I would,
essentially community insights, reports coming directly from communities that have been affected by a crisis as a layer of information in our existing tools and methodologies that already, as Arnold mentioned, leverage the power of satellite imagery and remote sensing and field assessments, which tends to come in a little bit later in time. So this would be immediate data and information from the communities directly to us.
Perfect. Then we have this question: how should the platform interact with national emergency services and existing official damage assessment systems?
We are looking for something complementary to that. So interoperability between the data that is obtained from this challenge with other existing systems is something that we'll be looking at. And again, emphasizing that how the outputs or how the exports are provided is going to be key. So again, I'll emphasize the point of having standardized formats like GeoJSON, like KML, shape files, structured CSVs. All these are ways that we can be able to export this data and complement with existing tools. And in terms of, again, how they can interact, would be sticking with the damage classification that we've provided. We provided some guidance on minimal damage, partial damage, complete damage, which we already use for our own reporting. So sticking to that sort of categorization is going to be key to be able to link with our other activities and works.
Perfect. Before reading the next question, for solvers in the chat, please make sure that you are entering question by question in different messages, so it's easier for us to spotlight them and go one by one. So next question is, will UNDP require integration with specific datasets, GIS systems, or satellite providers, or open source and publicly available data sources sufficient at this stage?
The short answer is that open source and publicly available data sources are sufficient at this stage. But solutions, as we mentioned also initially, should be designed with scalability and interoperability in mind, which would allow future integration within UN platforms and national GIS systems and partner data sets. And this also links to the previous question, right? This is one layer among others that we use on a day-to-day basis. So the ultimate objective is integration, but at the point of submitting a solution, you don't need to have all of that figured out, but have it be embedded in the design and the thinking behind the submission.
All right. I think we might have already covered this one, but what data standards, privacy requirements, and interoperability expectations should the solution adhere to? I think we have mentioned some of these ones, but I don't know if you would want to elaborate a little bit more on that if needed.
Yeah, and that's a good question. But generally, the expectations that we have around this would revolve around having a solution that is GIS ready in terms of being interoperable with other solutions that we talked about. An expectation would be something that prioritizes privacy and something that is ecosystem friendly to ensure that the insights that you get from this system does not just exist in a silo. So the solution must be immediately able to be utilized by others, again, coming to the point of standardized export formats. It should be able to minimize the collection of personally identifiable information. We don't need to know who the respondent is, but we are just looking to verify that they are a verified contributor. We'll be looking at solutions, for example, when they're collecting photos, they can be able to strip some of that sensitive data, like the device serial number that can be quite sensitive before sharing it with broader partners, but maintain only the key things like what is the GPS and what is the timestamp on which that particular photo was taken. An expectation, of course, would be on security. So how they encrypt the data at rest, how they encrypt the data at transit is definitely something we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at API fast mechanism so that it can integrate with other systems. And while it is not as mandatory, the ability to be able to very rapidly export sort of like PDF formats for high-level decision makers who might not understand dashboards and maps and just want a very quick high-level summary overview, a solution that can sort of give that functionality would be highly preferable and desirable. And of course, an expectation is a clear documentation of how the data schema works. We need to know that the system is transparent and can be easily adapted by technical teams. And I'll circle back to the initial point of even if you're using AI systems to design your solution, you should be the final architect, you should be the final engineer, you should be able to back up what you've done, and you should be able to understand really what's the bones of the solution that you're providing.
All right. Are there preferred or recommended datasets for building footprints, such as OpenStreetMap, or should solvers source this independently? And in regions where building footprint data is unavailable, what level of location accuracy is considered acceptable? We might have covered a bit of the last question throughout the webinar, but yeah, if you could explain a little bit more, that would be great.
Maybe the short answer to this one is that we don't have a single source of building footprint data that we require. You are very much free to use open source, publicly available data sets. I see OpenStreetMap mentioned here. I saw in the chat the Microsoft building footprint data set also being mentioned. All of those are fine, right? And in regions where building footprint data may not be as reliable or as precise, we work with what's available, right? So the best data set that you can find that works well with the rest of your system is going to be good enough.
Right. Should the solution include user authentication for verification, or is anonymous reporting preferred given the crisis context?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question as well, because the solution should be able to balance accessibility, as I mentioned before, with how reliable that data is. Definitely for anonymous reporting, it's going to be mandatory in some context, like conflict settings. So we'd go for optional or tiered verification mechanisms as well, where you can provide phone number or community validation or email address. These are all also encouraged. But at the very bare minimum, the solution should allow for anonymous reporting or pseudonymous reporting in terms of using nicknames, especially for respondents who don't want to share their personal information because of security, because of lack of trust, or simply because it's convenient for them. And then the tiered approach then that can be incorporated would be, for example, using the device ID as a unique identifier to be able to track a specific user, or if we have a user that has submitted multiple submissions over time that have been marked as authentic, then they can be sort of marked as a trusted contributor. Yeah, and yes, so optional authentication, but anonymous reporting should be the baseline.
All right. Does UNDP expect the platform to provide feedback to users, and what level of transparency is appropriate?
Feedback to users also sort of is related to that other question on non-monetary incentives, right? So feedback could be a simple way or a straightforward way rather to incentivize community members to report on damages in their community. So this could include, confirmation of submission. It could be visibility on aggregated results for the entire neighborhood, updates on how the data is being used or the intention behind that particular deployment. So giving some of that information back to the community, we feel would be important for a few different reasons, transparency included, but also incentives in terms of submitting this data and information. And that is much more likely when people know what the purpose is, what the objectives are, what type of information is useful for what type of decision making, right? So even if later down the line, this data and insights coming from communities was used, let's say, in designing a recovery plan for that specific region, then feeding that back to the community so that, there's uh, a sense of purpose around that particular deployment is very much encouraged and positive to the entire process of getting this data and making use of it and letting communities know what the value of that process was, right?
Perfect. Can you share examples of, well, I think you already mentioned some examples of non-monetary engagement mechanisms, but is there anything else that might come to mind to you too that you might have not mentioned, Anila?
Arnold, did you have something else in mind? Like feedback loops and a quick map or statistics that are showing the collective reports and what the impact of that crisis in that community is looking like were a couple of examples that we had talked about internally. Arnold, anything to add?
Yeah, I think those are very good ideas. I don't have anything to add. And I mean, this is the whole basis for the challenge. You're also looking to tap into the creativity of the colleagues in the room to get more ideas on how we can further boost this kind of engagement. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's probably a hundred different ways to go about it. So you're very much encouraged to think through uh, the user experience, right? And what are some of the ways that potentially in other contexts or in other applications, you've had the opportunity to encounter a well-designed app or a well-designed platform that encourages users to actually put that information in. So please feel free to draw from those previous experiences here.
Sounds good. All right. Are there any constraints or expectations around AI usage, including model type, cloud versus local, explainability, and the role of AI in verification versus assisting human decision making?
Yes, definitely there are expectations. And again, to mention that this is an optional feature that you can decide to embed within your challenge just for extra bonus. And if you decide to incorporate AI, it should be to support human decision making and not to replace the human component of it. So some considerations that you would consider would be on the model type. We are going to be looking at solutions that are lightweight. So on the device, for example, AI for the respondent, which might include tasks like local image compression, so that it works well in low bandwidth areas. So this should be on the device itself. Then for cloud native models would be things like optimizing high volume trend analysis and so forth. And here again, solvers are free to balance and weigh out what works and what doesn't. And again, as I mentioned before during the earlier slides, being able to explain how your AI models logic and reasons is going to be quite important. It should be very understandable even for a non-technical user. And going back to the example I gave before, if your solution, for example, employs an AI model that does automatic damage categorization, the documentation should clearly highlight how this has been reached upon. For example, have you looked at features like the walls were completely collapsed? Did you look at the roof just based on the visual features being completely blown away, so that it can be able to allow for rapid human verification? Because again, I'll emphasize that having a human in the loop is going to be mandatory for whatever process. And maybe finally, for the expectation on AI is to be having these confidence intervals. So it should not, just say as a standard that this building is damaged or this number of buildings are damaged, but would prefer if solutions, if at all they're employing these AI models, then they have some sort of confidence intervals, like the building is either 95% damaged or we are 90% damaged, that buildings within this neighborhood have moderate or are partially damaged. So this I think are the top expectations that we'll be looking at when incorporating AI.
Perfect. Then we have, can no-code or low-code tools be used for building the MVP, provided the final architecture is designed to be open source and scalable?
Short answer is yes, right? These are acceptable for the initial development, and provided that the overall architecture demonstrates that there's a pathway to scalability and sustainability and potential to use this tool in multiple settings, maybe at the same time, covering large areas. So as long as that is accounted for in the design of the tool, then you're good to go.
All right. Could you give us a specific example of credible data points? What would exactly count as a credible one? The bridge in location X has a large crack. Is that credible, or do you need more?
Yes. So again, a credible data point would definitely have a geolocation. So this is a GPS point, a photo, graphic evidence of it to go along with it. And again, we are not going to be looking at this independently. This is going to be overlaid with other sort of complementary analysis, like remote analysis or reports coming in from the field through key informants uh, to be able to verify. And again, the solution has provided sort of a standard structure on how to collect the data. So as long as that is filled, it might not be really about not the credibility of the information, but it's more about the credibility of the person who's entering the data, and how the system again can have this sort of checks to ensure that the users who are submitting this information are trusted or are authentic. But over to you, Anila, in case you want to compliment.
I think you answered it quite well, Arnold. Maybe just to mention that that's something that you already touched upon, right? This would be one layer among others. So we would also go through a process of layering this. Let's say there's a flood that has happened in a particular area, then we do have access to satellite-derived flood extents, and we're able to see if the damage that's being reported falls within or outside the flood extent, among other information layers. So as long as those basics that we had covered in the challenge itself, like what Arnold mentioned, the GPS location, the photo, answers to a recommended questionnaire that we also put in there in the annex, you have an example of a survey with categorizations, etc. So as long as that information is filled out and is exportable in a format that's compatible with our systems, which Arnold mentioned previously, then that should be good enough, right?
All right. How do you deal with the situation that the community member has not submitted a photo of the full extent of the crack?
This is something that I was thinking earlier also as we were going through the presentation and some of the questions around privacy. Like there could be some guidelines also provided to the community member as they're about to fill out the form, right? And this is what we do in our field assessments where we instruct people to go and take the photo that captures the entire building, or if there's space for a close-up photo to go and capture the, let's say, the crack in the building or the specific damage to the wall. So another thing would be when you're taking the GPS location, ideally you should be standing in front of the building, in front of the front door could be. Make sure that as you're capturing the photo, you're not taking photos of people passing by or the homeowner. Like those would be personally identifiable information that we really don't have a use for. And in the worst case scenario, it could be a breach to their privacy. So some sort of guidelines for the user, right? So that they know how do they take a photo, how they provide the information that is as useful as possible. So those could be embedded in the app, the platform, the solution that you design, whatever shape it takes, so that we maximize the chances of the data and information that we get out of it is as useful and as reliable as possible.
Perfect.
Just to agree with Anila. Yeah, just to compliment and agree with Anila that definitely the user design and the user interface is going to be paramount for that. And you can also explore, also solvers can explore the option of allowing for multiple photos, again, with in mind about the low bandwidth and low resource environments that they'll be working with. So that can also be another option, just to be able to take multiple photos that in case one does not work or does not give a full scale, we can be able to rely on another.
Perfect. I think being conscious of time, that we only have 2 minutes left. Please don't forget that submission deadline, June 23rd. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar on the challenge site. So you will have a link to the webinar recording. And also for all the questions that we were not able to answer because of the time constraint, what we will do is that we will pass them over to the UNDP team. The UNDP team will review them and answer them. And we will also share them on the challenge page, and we will email you letting you know once they have been uploaded on the site, just to make sure that all questions are answered. I don't know if we have the chance to answer this last question. How do you deal with the situation that a member says that an eNote B is offline, but it was really just going through a power cycle, false positive?
This is quite a technical one. I don't have that technical background myself, but unless Anila, you want to take a stab, otherwise we can also consult and circle back on that.
I think this is also referring to a cell site not functioning, and all of this can affect the connectivity for users in that area. This could be something for solvers to figure out, right? So we can also look into it and see if it's been dealt in a particular way in other applications, but you already seem to be aware of a potential issue. So if you can take this into account in the design of the solution, and it brings us back to that offline first and low bandwidth. So what are some of the ways that would ensure that the application is used in diverse contexts, in challenging contexts a lot of the time with no reliable connectivity? So some food for thought and thinking through some solutions here.
All right. Well, Thank you, Anila and Arnold, for your time today. I know it's been quite insightful for us solvers just to get to know you guys and get to know a little bit more about the problem and what's the whole context that we're dealing with, so they can take everything into account to design their solutions in the best way possible. Thank you to all the solvers that have joined today. Thanks for spending your time today with us just to learn a little bit more about the challenge. And as I mentioned before, we will be working on some of the questions that were not covered today, and we will post them on the challenge overview page. And also we will be sharing with you the recording of the webinar once we have it on that same site. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to your submissions that should be uploaded by June 23rd. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have
Thank
a
you,
good day
everyone.
ahead.
Take care. Have a good one.